Wait, sorry.
Or whenever you want to start. You guys are keeping track of your own time, right?
Okay. Timer's starting now. I affirm the resolution resolved. Adolescents ought to have the right to make autonomous medical choices. For the clarification of the round, I offer the following definitions. Ought, to indicate duty or obligation, from Collins English Dictionary. Adolescents, people between the ages of 10 to 22. Prefer this definition because it's a term of art specific to the medical field. Current research conceptualizes them in this age range. Allison and Schultz write, changes in conflict across adolescents via meta-analysis, changes between 12 to 22-year-old adolescents and parents. The value is morality, defined as the distinction between right and wrong behavior from Merriam-Webster. The criterion is maximizing well-being. The primary purpose of any actor in the context of the resolution is to benefit adolescents and patients as much as possible. Thus, the preeminent concern in the round is for the well-being of the patient. 2. The way we know what action is good or bad is whether the act increases another's well-being. This means that morality is based on our experiences of what is good or bad. Contention 1. Currently, under common law, minors cannot legally exercise their own right to informed consent of their bodily integrity. Darish and Huville. Minors are presumed legally incompetent to give their own consent to medical treatment. Although minors have the same right to bodily integrity as adults, only their parents are allowed to exercise this right. Medical decisions for their children is also based upon a presumption that parents will act in the best interests of their children and upon the constitutional right of privacy in family matters. Even if a minor were to be fully informed of her condition and were to understand the consequences and give their refusal or consent to medical treatment, that would not be valid as a matter of law. Contention 2. Adolescents are just as competent as adults to make autonomous medical choices. Steinberg. An adolescent might be mature enough for some decisions. The circumstances under which adolescents make medical decisions and commit crimes are very different and make different demands on individuals' brains and abilities. State laws governing adolescent abortion require a waiting period, as well as consultation with an adult. These policies create circumstances under which adolescent decision-making has been just as competent as adults. In contrast, violent crimes are usually committed by adolescents when they're emotionally aroused and with their friends. It therefore makes perfect sense to have a lower age for autonomous medical decision-making than for eligibility for capital punishment. Impact. Because the adolescents have shown similar medical decision-making capacity as adults, it makes no sense to treat them discriminately, so therefore they should have the ability to make medical decisions. Contention 3. Even if adolescents are different, it's still in their well-being to be given autonomous choice. Subpoint A. Adolescents are more willing to get medical attention without parental involvement. Felsman. The negative effects of parental involvement outweigh any positive effects. The adolescent who seeks parental consent for an HIV test is effectively disclosing that he or she has engaged in high-risk behavior. For many adolescents, avoiding such disclosures to their parents receives priority over taking an HIV test. A significant number of adolescents will be stopped from ascertaining their HIV status. By allowing parents or any other party to participate in adolescent testing decisions, HIV-positive teenagers may continue to engage in high-risk behaviors, which inadvertently increases the overall rate of HIV transmission. Subpoint B. Adolescents are more likely to get STD treatment with independent autonomous choice. Jackson et al. Scholars have specifically advocated for expanding the decision-making rights of adolescents. They have proposed the abolishment of parental consent requirements for minors. The rationale for this position includes both a perceived need to protect the public health and a desire to respect adolescents' privacy and autonomy. Adolescents obtaining parental consent will deter adolescents from receiving needed tests. So impact of this card. By voting affirmative, you essentially help those adolescents who have STDs because the neg will try to group them together with the parents, and that is detrimental to them. Contention 4. Homeless and runaway adolescents require autonomy to make medical choices. Need. Homeless runaway youth represent a large distressed subgroup of adolescents who need treatment attention. 1 in 8 children will run away before reaching age 18, and this increases to 1 in 4 for single-parent households and households with more than 8 persons. These present high rates of depression symptoms and other affective and anxiety disorders. The runaway and homeless youth also show higher rates of alcohol and drug use, ranging from 70% to 95%. Impact. Without the autonomy to make medical choices, homeless and runaway youth cannot find the medical attention they need to treat the disorders that commonly plague them. For these reasons, I vote affirmative and stay open for cross-examination.
Move it out some. I don't necessarily have a problem with you saying impact, just as the impact for the real world is, or the impact is, instead of just saying impact.
Okay.
Right? Or you could just say, this is important because, right?
Okay. 3 seconds.
Okay, sorry. So who pays for these treatments?
I don't have to, so it doesn't matter, right?
Okay, so you're saying we should provide the greatest amount of well-being, is that correct?
Yeah.
Isn't that looking to the outcomes of any action?
Okay, no, first of all, as you look to my second justification, right, the way we know whether an action is good or bad is whether it increases another's well-being, which is subjective. So that's
Do we see this
obviously
before the action is committed or after?
we see this like during the whole process, right?
During the process. So how is this process going to be effective if there's no way of payment?
Okay, so first of all, right, it does. Okay, so sorry, could you like restate the question?
Okay, so we need someone to pay for the treatment before we can see the treatment go into effect. Is that correct?
Okay, sure. But what the AFT is advocating for is that they should have the ability to make those decisions, because those decisions.
Okay, so why should we give them these decisions?
Because it increases their well-being.
Okay, point me where your case talks about that.
Okay, so to just like, that's
Okay, subpoint A. What is subpoint A in your third concern you're talking about?
Okay, so this is the adolescents are more willing to get medical attention without parental involvement.
Do we know this before or after we give them the autonomy?
Okay, so like, this is just a study that shows that.
But how do we know?
How do we know? Because of the study.
Okay, so your subpoint B is talking about how it helps kids get STD treatment. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, do we see them get treatment before giving the autonomy or after?
So, like, if we give them the autonomy, they will be able to get STD treatment. So after.
Okay, so who pays for these STD treatments?
Well, it's okay. So what the ACT is advocating for is that they're.
Okay.
So what the ACT is advocating for is that they be given those decisions.
Okay, so if you just give them the autonomy, but you don't let them get treatment, then how do they benefit from the autonomy?
Okay, so like, why wouldn't they get treatment if they have the autonomy?
Okay, if a child can't afford treatment, then how can they receive the benefits of the autonomy?
Okay, so like, it's fine as long as they make the decisions. Like, even if the parents pay for it, it's fine as long as they.
So you're saying the parents pay for it?
Even if they pay for it.
Okay, so you're talking about privacy a lot. How do we know they will have privacy from the parents if the parents are paying for it?
Okay, so I never stated privacy.
Your subpoint B talks about, in third contention says that it helps privacy. So how is it defending privacy? Jackson.
Okay, so like, again, it's like, it's out of respect for their privacy, but like, even if it, like, the privacy is infringed a little bit, it's okay.
So we can still infringe on their privacy. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, can we talk about it? Just take it.
Okay.
So Neville, just add, this came up in one of the other ends, to implementation, right? And just add an observation saying that the resolution doesn't call for you to explain how you're going to implement it, right? How you're going to pay for treatments. It just calls for you to give the child autonomy, right?
Okay.
So kind of preempt it a little bit.
So, right. I negate the resolution. Resolved. Adolescents ought to have the right to make autonomous medical choices. I value morality because ought questions moral obligation. To understand morality, we need to have agency identification. Morality necessitates agency to ever achieve the moral goals it requires. Since we are not all powerful, we have to form relationships to better ourselves in society. Antonio. In society, values are handed down from generation to generation. The community's shared values are what cause individuals to believe that they belong together in a community. The core values of a community define values. Behavior that violates core values is immoral, whether it happens in public or in private. Individuals in a community may have conflicting moral claims, but are united by overarching values. Individuals and the communities belong to encourage each other to adhere to shared values through individual and community moral voices. Individuals are born without an innate value system. We can never establish our own moral thought without interactions with other humans. Thus, my value criterion is fostering relationships within the society. Communities create the identity of individuals, shaping them and their moral views. This precludes any other framework, as there is no identity without an actor, without communitarian, that they have no moral system to create their morality. Contention 1. Children lack life experiences. Limiting their autonomy helps their long-term life planning. Ross 2. A reason to limit the child's autonomy is the fact that the child's decisions are based on a limited world experience, so his or her decisions are not part of a well-conceived life plan. Although he may be competent, limitations of his experience distorted his capacity for judgment. His parents have helped him obtain background knowledge of the world and capacities that will allow him to make decisions. Subpoint B. The focus on individual decision-making undermines the family. Sherry. Bioethics fail to appreciate the central role of family in human flourishing. Disputes are embedded in giving priority to individualism and personal liberty, appreciated as an entitlement to realize one's own understanding of the good. Idealizations tend to ignore real connections between parents and children. The practice of informed consent tends to approach patients as if they are not members of families. It is the individual who is appreciated as possessing authority. This individualistic approach to medical decision-making fails to appreciate the central role of family. Contention 2. Family consent is much more preferable than for allowing adolescents to make bad decisions. Subpoint A. Family-oriented medical consent is better. Cherry 2. Informed consent restricts access to information from family members. Since the family functions as a center of moral guidance for its members, informed consent ought to be done with a family-based medical decision-making as the default assumption. Family-based approaches to medical decision-making have an important place in healthcare law and medical practices, and are central for securing the best interests of the individual patient. Empirical data support understandings of parental authority, benefit children, help them make better decisions, avoid unnecessary risks, and develop them into mature, autonomous decision makers. Also increases social stability, social integration, and support, benefiting both adults and children. Family-oriented approaches to medical decision-making acknowledge the foundational social and moral reality of family. The benefits of subpoint B. The benefits of family consent outweigh patient confidentiality because of the consequential dependency of the adolescent on their patient. Henley of 3. Parental involvement in adolescent decision-making can be justified on the grounds of their right to know and the benefits of their knowing. Adolescents generally live with their parents and are financially dependent on them. Since they bear the financial and other consequences of their child's medical choices, they should have some input into those choices. There is a moral presumption in favor of parental involvement. The benefits of involving parents outweigh the harms of breaching confidentiality. Now to the affirmative case. So let's start with the framework. Okay, so the framework is talking about how we need to benefit well-being. First, you're going to prefer my framework of looking to the community. We can't look to benefiting the community because they have no moral values without people interacting with one another. If we are social human beings and we interact with one another, and that's how we gain our identity, to gain this a sense of moral actions and our own sense of morality. Moving on to the first contention, he talks about how we have to give them the adolescents this right because they have the bodily integrity right, but they can't really use it. If you prefer family consent essentially does that. It allows them to have the autonomy to make the decision, but we have input from the family. You prefer this because you can have the benefits of family knowing, but yet you still give adolescents some form of autonomy. Then moving down to his second contention, talking about his competency. So you can cross-apply Ross too, which says how they lack life experiences. And even so, even if adolescents are considered competent, their judgment is still immature and impaired. Henley. Even intellectually competent adolescents have shortcomings in their decision-making capacity. What counts as a risk or benefit would depend on the adolescent's values. Adolescents' preoccupation with physical appearance and peer acceptance impair their judgment, leading them to give inadequate weight to the effects of their decision on their future interests. Present benefits of decisions may receive disproportionate weight compared with potential long-term outcomes. Adolescents do not have the perspective needed to evaluate adequately the lasting significance of their immediate concerns. We're going to prefer both Henley and Ross because they take into the fact that they are competent. Even if adolescents are competent, they still lack this life experience or their judgment is impaired and immature. Moving down to his third contention. His entire third contention talks about how the impact of giving adolescents autonomy. So first, it's going to help them with STDs. He talks about how we need to value their privacy, but he states in CS that we can still take down this idea of giving them privacy. And even so, he's saying that parents will pay. If parents pay, they lose this privacy, and you're going to look to family consent for that reason. Second, if you don't let if parents are not the ones paying, then not all adolescents can receive treatment. So that's why you prefer family consent. It's much better. Moving on to specifically subpoint B, Jackson. He talks about how it's going to be benefiting the RCTVs and how they don't want to release their discourse about what their actions were. But family consent takes care of that. They allow discourse and acceptance because family isn't just going to let their adolescents suffer from STDs. Moving down to his fourth contention, talking about how homeless people. There's already a solution to this. You have emancipated minors and mature minors. It's given by the court, and it solves for exactly what the entire fourth contention is saying. So his fourth contention makes absolutely no sense in the status quo, and for these reasons, you negate. He's braced.
You gonna say that in round?
I forgot.
Okay. Ready?
Sure.
Okay. Starting on your contention one about the Ross card, which you cross-applied. So, what's the difference between limiting? What's the difference between limiting autonomy?
What do you mean?
So, like, how isn't limiting autonomy just completely taking away autonomy?
You're always going to have some form of autonomy, but in family consent, we have the autonomy of the parents and the adolescents.
So, are you taking away their autonomy?
We're giving them autonomy, more autonomy.
How are you giving them more autonomy by limiting it?
We allow them to have some input into the decision.
So, how is that giving them more autonomy?
They are part of the decision making.
Okay.
In the status quo right now, it's only the parents. But what I'm advocating for is that the parents work with the children to make a decision.
Okay, so now moving on to your subpoint B about your Cherry card. So exactly what is this the argument here?
Subpoint
Cherry? Yeah, Cherry or Sherry.
Subpoint B is talking about. You're talking about for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, if you focus on the individual, you undermine the idea of a family unit because you're only focusing on one.
So what's the issue with that?
It's like destroying the idea of family.
Okay, what's the problem with that?
You're going to cross-apply Tony. Tony talks about how we need to value a community as a whole. So in this, I guess you can cross-apply that, saying it's upholding the family unit.
So why should we uphold the family unit?
Because it helps the individual find their identity.
Okay. Now let's move on to your family consent. So why should we prefer family consent?
So you have the families be part, like the parents, as part of the situation because adolescents are financially dependent on their parents.
So what?
So what? What do you mean? So what?
So like just because they're dependent on the adults, does that mean that they have to like?
Okay, Ross. Okay, so look. Okay, Ross 1 talks about how they gain life experience from their parents. That's why we have the parents part of the decision-making process.
So like what I'm asking here is like. Just because the parents are paying for it, does that mean the adolescents have to put every single decision through their parents? Like they have to tell their parents about every single decision. Okay, so with family consent, it's almost the same as parental consent, but now we have like the adolescent being part. It's almost the same as the app, except we have the parents involved. Okay, thank you. That's all the questions I have. Starting series. much prep time? Do you have?
217. I'll just take 2 minutes.
So as a brief off-time roadmap, I'll be going over my case, and then I'll be attacking my opponent's case. Ready? Okay. So starting off on the value and value criterion. So looking to the value criterion of fostering relationship. Judge, you look to the person in this round who better maximizes the well-being of the adolescent, because the well-being is the most fundamental right. Because well-being essentially is their life. If you maximize their life, you look to that person, because that's the most important thing in the round. Moving on to the contention 1. My opponent completely misrepresents what my contention 1 is stating. My contention 1 states that the current status quo is based off this idea that parents will always make the best decisions for their child. Obviously, this is not the case. There are such factors such as abusive parents. Because of this, you completely don't look to the family consent ideal, because the parents because there are abusive parents. And if there are abusive parents, that means that they will take away the autonomy of the adolescents, and also they will make decisions that harm the adolescents. And because of this, you vote affirmative. Moving on to the contention 2 about lacking life, and he attacks it by saying that adolescents lack life experience. This doesn't mean anything. Just because they lack life experience doesn't mean that they can't make competent decisions. And now moving on to the Henley card, which he states that they don't have any perspective. That again, the adolescents know what's in their best interest. This is exactly what my my value criterion subpoint 2 states, is that they know the way we know is whether it increases their well-being. The adolescents know what increases their well-being because they're the people who make the decisions. Moving on to contention 3. Judge, again, my opponent states that parents pay, so therefore you have to look to family consent. Again, that doesn't matter whether the parents pay. The adolescent should be the one to make the decisions. And by adding parents into the equations, you essentially proliferate the problem. This is exactly what the subpoint A is stating, is that because the adolescents don't want to tell their parents. Because if they tell their parents, they fear like retribution. Moving on to the contention 4, he states that there's already a fix in the status quo about emancipated minors. However, this is obviously not working. There are still homeless youth. Because of this, the act is the one who solves for these homeless youth's well-being by giving them the autonomy. They don't have parents. They completely fit around. They don't fit under his plan. Because of this, you look to vote for the act. Now, moving on to the negative case. So, again, against this value criterion of fostering relationships, you prefer the person who increases the most amount of well-being in this round. So therefore, you vote act, because obviously the act is the one who actually shows an impact and who increases well-being. Moving on to the contention 1 of lack of experience. Again, lack of experience means nothing in the medical context. You can't have experience in making a medical decision. And also, he states in subpoint A that limiting autonomy will increase long-term autonomy. This makes absolutely no sense. By limiting autonomy now, that essentially means that they won't know what to do with the autonomy later on. Moving on to the Sherry card, he states that by decreasing that focusing on individualism decreases family values. However, is that really a bad thing? By increasing by giving adolescents more autonomy, they will know better what to do with that autonomy and will be able to make the best decisions for themselves. Moving on to the contention 2, Judge, you can literally just cross-apply my contention 3 because it states why you don't look to the model. Because by adding parents into the equation, you essentially proliferate the problem of STDs, and because you proliferate the problem of STDs, this is a distinct negative of the negative, and this is one of the reasons why you vote affirmative in this round. 2 minutes. Yeah. It's going to be interesting. Hopefully our models. Yeah. Practice. What is that sphere? Good enough.
Wait, this is for a late round, right? This is a late round. Okay, so you the two coming up.
Okay, the order will be, let's go, crystallization, actually. You can float this on the AC.
Crystallization.
Crystallization, you can float this on top of the AC.
Okay.
Then go over to the negative case. Okay, so basically what we have to do in this round. Okay, so what I need to show you is that we shouldn't go with the affirmative plan. What my opponent needs to do here is show you that we have to go with the affirmative plan. So starting on the framework, he says that we have to look to maximizing greatest amount of well-being, but you have to prefer the negative framework first, because Tony talks about how community helps individuals find their sense of morality. That's why you value it before. His own value is morality. That's why it's my entire framework is a prerequisite to his. So that's why you prefer mine over his entire framework. Moving down to his first contention. Even if I misrepresented it, if he wins this first contention, it doesn't mean he wins this round. I always say it's better for you to go with family consent because it does solve. It solves for what's wrong with status quo. Let's move on to the second contention. So this is the main part of the debate, whether or not it's competency versus a life experience. You prefer the negative arguments, okay? First, if they lack life experiences, they're not going to be making the best decisions, okay? That's why we have adults making the best decisions for themselves, because their decisions are based on a longer life experience than Allison's would. And then with Henley, he says that Henley really has no impact. What Henley talks about is that their judgment is impaired. He says that it's okay because they know what's best for themselves. But what Henley says is that if their judgment is impaired, they don't know what's best for themselves. So you prefer my evidence over his than them being competent, because I actually take in factor that they are competent. Let's move on to his third contention. The third contention is what could win him the round. Okay, so let's start with the third contention. His entire third contention needs a way of implementation. He says that he doesn't need a way of implementation, but if he has no way of implementation, then there is no solution to the problem. So he does give a way of implementation in CS about the parents paying, but that conflicts with his subpoint A. If the parents pay, then the adolescents lose their privacy with STDs and what their activities are. So it does not solve if the parents are paying. Same with his subpoint B, talking about how we have to uphold their privacy. But if you allow the parents to pay, then they lose the sense of privacy. Secondly, if he says that the adolescents pays in his next speech, then not all adolescents will be able to receive treatments, and that's why you prefer family consent. At least I take into factor and allow them to make decisions with their parents who are more willing to pay for the treatments. Moving down to subpoint B. He talks about how emancipated minors and mature minors with status quo doesn't work, but it actually does work. You can it doesn't take kids off the street. That's not what emancipated minors and mature minors are doing. What they're doing is allowing Alice to make decisions for themselves. He thinks that it's going to solve for homelessness, but you can see how the affirmative wouldn't solve for homelessness either. Let's move on to the negative case. Let's move down to Cherry, which talks about how it undermines family. He drops what Cherry 1 is talking about. Cherry 1 is saying why families are so important. He talks about how it helps humans flourish, how it allows Alice to grow from childhood to adulthood. That's basically what Cherry is saying. Ross is talking about how parents help their children grow with a life experience to make the best decisions. So you prefer families in so many ways. First, Ross 1 and Cherry. Moving on to contention 2. He says this entire third contention disregards my family consent plan. But you look to Cherry 3. Cherry 3 talks about why we need to prefer families because they help their children. And you can see how we uphold families more than just giving the adolescents their privacy, because we allow because adolescents are financially dependent on their parents. And then Cherry talks about how it's better because in the affirmative world, it's a focus on the individual alone. It disregards whether or not they have families. So you can see how that contradicts with Cherry 1 in the affirmative case. So you'll be voting in 3 areas. First, you're going to be voting on whether or not they're competent or not. You're going to be voting for the negative for this because you can see how even if they're competent, they lack the life experiences and their judgment is impaired. He makes no real response against Henley, which talks about why their judgment is impaired. So he can't make anything up in the next speech. Moving down to his third contention. His entire third contention talks about post implementation, but he provides no real source of implementation, so you can drop his entire third contention alone. You can vote on that alone, but even if you don't vote on that, you can vote on the family consent plan. The entire negative case has more benefits than delaying the AFCO loan. You can see how I allow parents have some influence on the decision. You can see how the parents are more willing to pay in the negative world. You can see how he talks about. Actually, let's go back for a second to his defense on his first contention. Okay, he talks about how there are abusive parents. You can drop this argument. Okay, we have to look at families either way, even if they're abusive or not, because they're the ones raising their children. You can't just tell if parents are abusive, you can't just stop them from raising their child. They're already raising their child. You're going to still prefer the parents because they're the ones helping these children transition from childhood to adulthood. So it doesn't matter if they're abusive or not. You're going to still value them over the affirmative world. And for these reasons, you negate.
Interesting.
What's that? I dropped it. I really have to go back.
Hey, Mr. Chris. Hey. Oh, thank you. So kind. Alright. I don't get to say a brief off-time roadmap?
Okay, so as a brief off-time roadmap, essentially I'll just be giving you 5 reasons as to why you should vote affirmative in this round. Alright. Okay. So starting off on the mental competency argument, Judge, you vote F because he completely drops the impact of this card. He concedes that adolescents are mentally competent. And my impact specifically states that because adolescents make similar decisions as adults, because of this, there's no reason as to why they shouldn't have the ability to make autonomous medical choices. Because of this is a clear reason why to vote F, because he completely concedes this, and also because the impact says so. Now moving on to the second reason. Again, there are abusive parents in society. Because of this, he states that you can't stop people from raising their child. Of course you can. That's why there's foster homes and situations such as this. The reason why you don't allow the neg is essentially proliferating this idea, and because of this also ties into the contention 3, which states by voting F, you essentially solve for the problems of STDs. But because if you allow parents to be a part of their decision-making process, the children will not talk to their parents because they're afraid of retribution. So the abusive parents, and also the contention, because this you vote for the contention 3. Now moving on to the contention 4. The affirmative helps solve for the medical needs of the homeless people. This is completely out of the range of the negative plan because he is advocating for a family consent plan. So the act solves for this. And also, now moving on to the fifth reason and the most important reason. The most important reason in this round why you vote affirmative, because the affirmative proves that by voting F, you essentially maximize the most well-being, and because well-being is the most, or life is the most essential component of having autonomy or any other moral theory, you essentially vote for the affirmative because the affirmative solves for all of these reasons. For these reasons, you vote affirmative.
Okay, so
it's going to be interesting.
That's around, right?